So the Oscars are coming up, and I've spent the last few months catching up on movies from the last year, and I gotta say, 2024 may have been even better for movies than it was for music. Although I haven't seen every movie that's gotten some buzz, here's my top 10 of the year so far. Starting with a controversial choice, but I'm fucking saying it, Megalopolis. I went into this one fully aware of its reputation, and strangely enough, much of what people complained about this movie ended up attracting me to it, because it seemed like a giant dumpster fire that I just had to see. And sure, much of this movie is ridiculous, but it actually contributed to this tongue-in-cheek spirit that many epics of Hollywood end up squashing out due to their humorless self-indulgence. Much of this movie is embarrassingly sentimental and pretentious, but it's trashy and lowbrow too, which brought a playful chaos to the film's tone. Francis Ford Coppola clearly just loves movies and filmmaking of all standards, which is a quality I admire, especially with his lack of concern for alienating his audience, not catering to film snobs or casual viewers. Megalopolis is a movie that's not afraid to be exactly what it is, and I think that's awesome in its own way. Next is what I now consider to be the best DreamWorks movie, The Wild Robot. Growing up with Pixar movies and animation in general is rough as I get older, because I see a lot of the same formulas play out in family movies now, but just as traditional songs can still be beautiful with new arrangements, familiar stories can still hit hard if it's presented in a new way, and I felt that for this one. I liked the idea of a strong moral protagonist being that way because that's literally how it's programmed, and how the relationship between this character and the animal kingdom read like a challenge of the optimist versus a village of cynics. Some of the plot developments are predictable, but I think the endearing characters and virtues presented in the film earn these moments. I still hope it doesn't win Best Animated Feature against another movie on this list, but in general, I think it deserves the hype. Next up is A Real Pain. I hope Kieran Culkin takes the Best Supporting Actor win for this one. I had only just finished watching the series Succession, which showcased the full range of emotions Kieran can swing to while still being the detached smartass he usually is. And Jesse Eisenberg sells a pretty good lead performance too. It is a surprisingly sensitive buddy comedy that deals with the invisible resentments there can be in relationships between one who is shy and neurotic versus one who is careless and outgoing. It idles a bit, and I was underwhelmed by the ending, but if you want a good character-driven drama with a generally light tone, this one might be up your alley. Number 7 is In a Violent Nature, another great movie met with ungrateful reception. It is a typical slasher, only instead of following the victims, it follows the killer. There is no music, and much of it is just watching the slow, trudging pace of the killer as he sneaks in on each character and slaughters them. The cold and consistent silence evokes the killer's inhuman psychopathy in a genuinely unnerving portrait, and believe me, some of the murders in this can be pretty upsetting. With the rise of the Terrifier franchise, I guess horror fans were expecting a more playful tone when it comes to gore, but this movie almost de-romanticizes that, sensitizing us to who we really root for when we watch movies just for the killing. It is deliberately unpleasant to make its point, but when I say that, I don't mean it's entirely joyless either. To be frank, slashers are so formulaic that a random person could write a plot without even using AI, so seeing a lot of the standard turns and plot developments through a flipped perspective was notably refreshing. This is the most impressive slasher I've seen in years. I'd argue it even surpasses Ty West's X trilogy, and a sequel from director Chris Nash is already in the works. Number 6, The Substance. Yeah, I know this one has already been talked to death. Of course, this is one of the best body horror movies, but it is also an example of topical horror that isn't just what's shown on screen, but a reasonably grotesque response to the culture of American beauty standards, weaponizing real-life concerns in the same way that other great horror movies have, like how Godzilla represented the anxiety of living in post-nuclear Japan, and how Kubrick's The Shining forced you to sit with the terrors of domestic abuse. The pace of the film is stimulating, and I especially think it could have been nominated for more awards in sound design, because in many scenes, the audio was what caused most of my discomfort. I do wish the satire wasn't so painfully unsubtle, but maybe the cringe of enduring a super obvious message works with the cringe of all the gross deformations and violence. Not sure if that was on purpose, but hey, that's what I got out of it. Kicking off the top 5 is I Saw the TV Glow. I saw this one in theaters, and for a while I told people this was my film of the year. And listen, I'd had zero context about its underlying trans allegory, so all that went completely over my head. But what I got out of it in the theater hit me on a personal level regardless. We are in a time where life is so hard that everyone I know is media dependent to distract themselves from the empty lives they lead. And roughly speaking, this movie depicts a casualty of that lifestyle. As we push down our yearning, we start to believe that it's too late to turn back, but it's never too late. The more troubling truth is that we might just be too afraid to change when given the chance. Rather than letting our dreams empower us, we use them as an emotional crutch to help us dissociate from the disappointment of our lives. Dreaming becomes a comfort food that validates the version of us buried deep inside, which keeps us functioning in the short term, but results in the death of a potentially better life. The film's surreal and bizarre style truly earns the label of Lynchian, with loads of stiff, fugue-like performances coupled with some captivating and creepy visuals. The reproductions of corny 90s to early 2000s shows like Goosebumps was a nostalgic treat too. Maybe not the easiest watch for everyone, but it struck a heavy chord with me. Following this is The Brutalist, which I predict will win Best Picture. There have already been some smearing articles written about how the production of this movie used AI, but I swear anyone who is truly bothered by this hasn't seen the movie. There is a stifling number of iconic and beautiful shots in this that were organically produced, and all for a budget smaller than you would expect. The score is easily my favorite of the nominations, and while I don't know if Adrien Brody will win Best Actor due to his accent being synthetically enhanced, his character is definitely the most compelling male role I've seen in 2024. Another detractor for some is the 3.5-hour runtime, and I will say that I think this movie's watchability could be determined by how much you love the sheer craft of filmmaking. Like, the writing is good, but I could see how another story about the typical rise and fall of a struggling visionary probably wouldn't wow the average moviegoer. But like most great stories, the real charm is how elegantly it's told. Full disclosure, one thing I would have changed is the ending. I'll keep it vague, but basically a character does something that should be confronted about, and when the confrontation finally happens, it stops in the middle of the payoff. It's still artfully shot, with some visual symbols to chew on, and I'm sure someone online has already written an essay for why this was perfectly justified, but I just wasn't much of a fan. It cuts to an epilogue with a speech that condenses the movie's themes in a few sentences, but even then I would have preferred these points to be ambiguous. All that being said, this is an objectively great movie, and I wouldn't question anyone who throws this at their #1 spot. It deserves to sweep the Academy Awards way more than Amelia Perez. Entering the top 3, Anora is now my favorite Sean Baker film. I had liked Tangerine and Florida Project for their wandering slice-of-life stories, but I was not prepared for how tight and constantly entertaining Anora turned out to be. Mikey Madison is awesome, and probably my favorite of the Best Actress nominations, although I seriously doubt the old geezers who vote at the Oscars are giving that award to someone who strip dances with pornographic precision in the first 30 minutes. I appreciate how positive and sympathetic this movie treats the lifestyle and humanity of sex workers, but for those who don't like erotica, just know that sex work isn't even close to what this movie is about, and how the tone of the film shifts beyond the first act might take you by surprise. It's not just sexy, this is also one of the funniest movies from last year, and the comedic tone amplifies the little bursts of drama by contrast. It is structured a bit like a classic maturity arc, since the start is euphoric and careless, while the end culminates to a crushing fall to reality as Madison's character breaks down. It's probably not as well made as The Brutalist or as feminist as The Substance, but it's hard to think of a movie I had more fun watching this year. Number 2 is Nickel Boys. As soon as I heard this movie was in first person, I had to see it as soon as possible. While the pace of the film can be a bit navel-gazy, the experience overall is intense. The whole project is an exhibition of the main character reminiscing about his time at a Floridan reform school in the 1960s, with scenes in the present being in third person and scenes from the past being in first. These scenes in first person almost always have a peculiar detail it focuses on that would make sense to stick out in someone's mind, as if we're reliving these memories as they replay in the character's head. We have seen period dramas about race before, but the presentation has never been this intimate. This will go down as one of the essential examples of subjective camera work for modern cinema, and I hope other filmmakers take note of how commitment to an ambitious idea can still be rewarded in the age of sequels and remakes. I think Ramel Ross was robbed of a Best Director nomination for this one, and I can't wait to see what he makes next. And my pick for the best movie of 2024 is Flow. There were a lot of great movies on here, but I had to put this one at the top because I think animation has needed something like this for decades. The film is already unique by having no dialogue, so you have to interpret the animals' desires and personalities based on their behavior and body language, which is a bold choice for both adult and younger audiences. The plot is simple, but transcends into a surreal and fantastical meditation on time, represented by an impossible flood that consumes everything until nature resets itself and its survivors reflect on who they were at the beginning. It moved me how well this film illustrated that some of the most important gestures do not need words, and how cinema can capture these gestures even if the subjects aren't human. Landscapes of symbolism populate this movie's world, and the insistent mystery of it being wordless elevates it into a legitimate art film. There's even a death scene that's implied to be self-inflicted, but that's the most ambiguous part of the movie, and how you respond to it may determine your attitude about the whole experience. While The Brutalist's original score should win the Oscar, I would say the score for Flow was my second choice, and impressively, it was composed by the director himself, having written 7 hours of material before it was cut down into 85 minutes. The movie was animated entirely on Blender, a free 3D animation program that's considered for beginners rather than a studio standard, and the studio in question is relatively new from the country of Latvia, where Flow has now become its most successful production. And not only is this the first Latvian movie to be nominated for an Oscar, it was nominated for both Best Animated Feature and Best International Film, which is a first for the Academy Awards. While I know this movie won't shake the core of everyone I know, nothing else from 2024 made me more optimistic for the future of cinema, especially in the world of animation. This is Colton Basinger, thanks for watching.